We're told in the world of education that we're not supposed to use this term pathways, that it's become too cliche, that it's overused. The truth of the matter is, in some cases, there is no better word. We're talking today on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast all about career pathways. How do we get students into great careers? How do we focus on workforce? How do we focus on what they're doing at the technical and community college to prepare them for those careers? What do we need to do in our high schools and tech centers to prepare them for that college pathway? And what do we need to do at the middle school level when students are in fifth, sixth, and seventh grade? Absolutely most impressionable time of their lives in so many cases to inspire them toward the right careers. My name is Matt Kirkner. I'm the host of the Tech Ed Podcast, and I am joined today by the president of BridgeValley Community and Technical College in West Virginia. Her name is Dr. Casey Sachs. And Dr. Sachs, thank you so much for joining us on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Matt, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
You have an incredible path that you took to get into higher education. Tell us a little bit first about your original career plans and where you started out with your career, and then what ended up initiating that change.
Yes, I thought I was going to be a psychologist.
Okay.
Went through school, went the clinical psychology track, did my clinical experience, and all my clients were geriatric. I felt like my normal day was, I'm 80 years old and I'm depressed. And I've been depressed for 80 years, and now I'm here talking to you, my therapist, to sort of reconcile this death, dying, aging part of my life with having lived a life I was never happy with. And I really struggled with that.
Sure.
God bless the people who do that work every day. I could not be one of them.
Well, and so you start out as a psychiatrist. Some might mention that there's a huge aspect to that in terms of leading an institution like you are now. So I'm sure that'll influence our discussion over the course of time. But certainly hearing these stories of people who got to the end of their career, they were 80 years old, got to the end of their life, and maybe had some regrets, maybe wish they had done something different. That really sounds like influenced your decision making as far as where your career went from there. I know you spent a fair amount of time at the federal level with the U.S. Department of Education. So tell us about that role a little bit. I know our audience is going to be excited to hear this.
I finished my work with older adults and thought, gosh, what else could I do? And landed on college and university work. I had been a hall director in grad school. And so took a job in Philadelphia at Drexel University. And in my time at Drexel, I learned, gosh, people who are promoted to positions that I would aspire to in higher education have doctorates in higher ed. And so I looked at programs and had the happy decision of getting into all of the programs that I had applied to. So chose to go to Bowling Green State University in Ohio because the state of Ohio paid for my PhD. Thank you, state of Ohio. And when I got out, it was that 2008 recession and no one was hiring. And I thought at that point I was going to be a vice president of student affairs at an R1 institution. That's sort of the track that I had seen for myself. No one was hiring in 2008, and I ended up needing to be home. My mom wasn't doing well, and so I wrote the community college president in my hometown a letter and said, I will work for free. Just give me something meaningful to do. And she did. Wow. And that turned into a job. So that's when I actually found community colleges. And then you asked about federal work. I was just lucky. I had a friend who had gotten confirmed by the Senate to be an assistant secretary at the United States Department of Education, and he really didn't know that much about community colleges. He was a career and tech ed expert at the K-12 level, and the office at the United States Department of Education that handles career and tech ed, it's CTE at the K-12 level and at the higher ed level. So he called and said, I trust you and you do really good work. Can you come be my community college expert? So that turned into being able to serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community Colleges at Ed.
That's such a fascinating career pathway, and you volunteer you literally stand up and say, I'll work for free at the community college if that's what it takes, and you end up being at the Department of Education focusing on community colleges and K-12. Tell me a little bit about what that job felt like. What was it that kept you busy? I guess, were you in Washington, D.C.? Is that where they had you opposite? Yeah.
I was D.C. based. And it was a really fun job. The role is to help the secretary and to help the other senior officials really understand it's career and technical education at both the K-12 and higher ed level. It's prison education, it's adult education, and it's community colleges. And so for me, that meant a lot of work on workforce. I collaborated very frequently with colleagues at the Department of Labor because there's just such a lot of intersection between how we're helping students understand career and technical education and those pathways and what happens at the Department of Labor in terms of how do we connect those pathways to jobs.
So you have this awesome experience at the national level. I don't, I've met a lot of presidents of technical and community colleges. I'll admit that I don't know that I've ever met one that worked at the Department of Education before they became a president. Maybe some went in the other direction. So tell us how that experience at the national level influences the work you do now, Casey, at the community college and technical college.
It's a great question. I think one of the things that really helped me was that I was able to come back to West Virginia with a whole list and say, I know that we've always done things this way, and it's because we think we have to. And I just want to be able to say out loud that we don't have to. And so if we want to keep doing them this way, fine. But we're not required by the feds to do things this way. I've found often in colleges and universities, especially, we like to say, oh, well, we have to do this because of the accreditor. And if you actually read the accreditation rules, that's not true. You're doing it because you want to. You think the accreditor's making you, and that might be a valid reason. Or in states that have a system office, you hear a lot, well, we have to do this because the system office is making us. And also, that's probably not true. And so, not unlike those other experiences, coming back from being at the Fed, I found lots of times people say, we can't do this thing because the federal government won't let us. And the reality is, actually, the federal government probably would let you. You just need to know how to apply for a waiver or how to change your state plan or how to get someone else at your state level to do the thing that you want to do. And so that's especially true. The way the federal government sort of is structured in meaningful ways that affect education are through federal acts. So the Higher Education Act is one where federal financial aid comes from for schools, or the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act is another that really gives states workforce dollars. And so those things, understanding the funding stream and what the rules are, has made a huge change in how I work at a state level.
So interesting that you bring up, Casey, the accrediting bodies. I do a lot of work in another part of my life with a lot of universities around the United States, particularly around aligning to industrial skills and aligning to what industry is looking for in terms of people going through baccalaureate programs, people going through advanced degree programs. We were trying to innovate at a college a couple of years ago, a university, and the answer I kept getting was, "Well, ABET won't let us do that. ABET won't let us do that." And I was like, "It doesn't seem like ABET would be standing, your accrediting body would be standing in the way of you trying to innovate in education." I actually called the CEO of ABET, and he was offended that somebody was using his agency or his organization, I should say, as an excuse for not being to innovate. He's like, "We can't stand it when we hear that." So, to your point, just because somebody says we can't do something doesn't mean we can't do it. And kind of looking under the hood and understanding what we're actually up against from a regulatory standpoint or from a standards or requirements standpoint, and then working around that particular challenge and finding a way around it, or maybe even recognizing that it doesn't apply. And you had that credibility coming from the Department of Education to be able to say, look, I've done these things at the federal level. I understand what these expectations are. Let's go ahead and innovate, and we'll figure it out along the way. One of the things I know you're working really hard at figuring out and innovating both is this whole idea of aligning to industrial expectations, aligning what students are learning to what your industrial employers are expecting. And certainly they expect that at the K-12 level. They expect it from our community colleges. They expect it from our universities. And they expect it in terms of our workforce training. So let's start with that whole preparing the next generation of the workforce. And what, in your mind, given all these relationships that you've been able to create and all this experience that you've had, Casey, what are the important things that technical and community colleges should be doing to ensure that they're aligning to the needs of industry?
I mean, there's a lot of things that colleges can do to help better align with industry. One of the first is paying attention to the data in your area. So, who are the big employers? Where are people likely to get jobs? What are the jobs that are open? For me, when I moved back to West Virginia, as you mentioned, coming right out of a pandemic, nursing was a really clear, critical need. Probably my first week here, I got an appointment in the governor's office and said, I need $9 million to build a nursing wing in my building and expand nursing. I see how to do it. We need some facilities. And they said, can you do it with $3 million? So my team and I went back and completely reworked our budget to figure out how do we dramatically expand the number of nurses we create in a year with a smaller budget than we thought we needed. And it's fantastic. I wish you were here. I could give you a great tour of what looks like a virtual hospital. I mean, I guess it looks like a real hospital. It was really a proud moment when we were putting all the furniture in it. The man who does hospital beds at real hospitals. And he came in and was doing one of our rooms and talking to one of my nursing faculty members. He said, "You might not want the bed on this wall because the sun will be in your patient's eyes." And she stared at him and she was like, "Our patients are mannequins." And he just cracked up laughing and he was like, "Oh, I thought this was a real care facility."
That's awesome. I love that story. That's beautiful. And it's so realistic, and that the individual that's putting the beds in doesn't even realize that we're simulating as opposed to providing actual care, but certainly preparing that next generation of nurses to provide that exceptional and next level of care as they're moving out into the workforce and working for all the great employers that I know you're engaged with. Who are some of those employers that you've really built those strong relationships with?
Well, if I stick in the vein of nursing, I think one of the things that's really important is that it's not just having a great facility, although that's wonderful for my students. It is the relationships that make those programs so wonderful. So the two big hospital systems in town provide preceptorships for all of our students. So we have one-on-one instruction for students who are in their last semester, and the hospitals are paying for that. We have one hospital, WVU Medicine, actually chooses 10 students a semester and they pay them to go to school. It's not a scholarship. It's a job. And they get paid $5,000 each semester and a $5,000 signing bonus when they graduate with a guarantee of a job. It's another hospital in town who says, "We want to provide clinical faculty for you because we know that you can't afford to staff these nursing programs at the level that you need to." So it's truly working with those hospitals and figuring out what they can do to help support the program and being really honest about what our resources are and how much we want it to cost people and what are the wages likely to be when they get out. How bad do the hospitals really need nurses is sort of the question. And I think that's true across a variety of program areas, that we need early childhood educators, but those are jobs that are paying minimum wage. They're not a family sustainable wage. And we don't have employers in the area who are saying we need people who have gone to a program for that. They're willing to hire a student right out of high school. And so we actually closed our early childhood education program at the college since I've been here, because it's irresponsible of us to tell a student, come take out loans, come use your financial aid award to get a credential that employers aren't valuing. That if the employers wanted it and if they said we can only hire people who have this certification, then great, then we should offer it. But it's not of value to our employers, and it's certainly not producing a wage premium for our students. So it's sort of a combination of what's happening for our students and what makes us a better community partner.
When I was in industry, you mentioned certifications. I didn't really know what a third-party certification was, at least in the part of industry that I was in. It might be that in healthcare or other endeavors that they at that time carried a little bit different weight. But the truth is that on the industrial side, I had no idea what this was. And so one of the things that I always counsel educators about is, look, if we're looking a student in the eye and saying, if you earn this certification, or for that matter, you earn this certificate or you earn this associate degree, and there's a job waiting for you when you get done, and they go through that program and there's no job, or to your point, there's a job, but it's a job that they could have gotten with a high school diploma. What are we doing? We're just ripping off that student. And so having the guts to be able to say, look, this is an area where it doesn't make sense for us to invest. And yeah, I'm sure there were some people that were supporters of that program that ended up, with their feelings hurt or disappointed that you had to end the program. But let's invest in these areas where people actually need employees. And if you've got, in this case, hospitals that are stepping up and saying, we're going to pay a student $5,000 a semester to attend this program, we're going to give them a $5,000 signing bonus when they're done. We believe so strongly in educating the next generation of nurses that we are going to pay our employees to step out of the hospital and into the classroom and into the labs and deliver learning to those individual students. That is where you know that you really have a phenomenal partnership and you're really aligning to those needs of industry. We've talked about healthcare. I referenced manufacturing. As I suggested, I spent my whole career on the manufacturing side. Talk a little bit about some of your manufacturing or industrial partners that you're particularly proud of.
We have some great manufacturing partners. We actually are the education provider for the West Virginia FAME chapter. So FAME is the Federation for Advanced Manufacturing Education. And it's something that Toyota started. They sort of kicked it off and said, instead of all of us manufacturers in the region trying to cannibalize each other's talent, let's try and grow the talent pool. And so they collectively got together and said, who are the manufacturers in our area who are willing to do that? And then the Putnam County Development Authority, so one of the local EDAs, has been sort of the linchpin for us. They do all the convening, they get everybody together, they do a lot of advertising. And what's amazing is all these other groups, they're recruiting students into my manufacturing program. So what they've sort of set up front is we really like the product you create, but the elevator speech on can you come be an advanced manufacturing technician is a lot longer than the elevator speech on can you come be a nurse. And so they recognize that they need to do that collectively as an industry and to go out to schools and to tell community members and to talk to Rotary clubs, because our AMT students on average are making $85,000 when they graduate with a 2-year associate's degree. They're really good jobs, especially in, well, anywhere, those are good jobs, but they're good in West Virginia. Those are very good jobs in West Virginia. And we're excited that we can do that for students with an associate's degree. But if I, the college, am the only one who's out there recruiting and trying to get people into the program, it's really hard to grow it, no matter how bad the employers say they really want the talent. And so we're very lucky that our employers are smart enough to recognize that they have to be part of that solution. And so we just sat down and said, how many people can you take in the AMT program? And I was like, I'm not bursting at the seams. Keep trying.
Keep recruiting. Yeah. Well, and working backwards through that answer, first of all, and I would tell you in my days in manufacturing 10, 15 years ago, we didn't necessarily hear a lot of stories like this where manufacturers and industrial employers were recognizing that it was as much their responsibility to get students and young people and people of all ages, for that matter, excited about careers in advanced manufacturing. I think a lot of folks at that time, and I'm not putting words into your mouth, I'm just telling you from my observation, a lot of folks back then were maybe blaming their local technical or community college for the lack of talent, as opposed to recognizing that there's this huge opportunity to collaborate and solve the problem together. We ought to be able to solve the problem if the jobs are paying $85,000 a year, and it's certainly in a state like my home state of Wisconsin, I'm guessing same in West Virginia, $85,000 a year goes a long, long way. That is not just a family supporting wage. That's a great wage. You can build a career, you can build a lifestyle around making that kind of money. And that's entry level, right? And the sky's the limit in manufacturing. And then I just have to tell you, one of the things that you said that I thought was incredibly poignant, and I haven't heard it put this way, the elevator speech for an advanced manufacturing technician is a lot longer than the elevator speech for a nurse. I think I know the answer to this next question, but why do you think that is? Why is the elevator speech so much more complicated, and why does it take more time?
I think we've all seen a nurse in our life. We've all been to the doctor. We've all had an experience with a nurse. We all know what a teacher is. We all went to school at some point in our careers. And so it's much easier to explain something you have experience with. Gosh, I was out of grad school before I even realized what AMTs could have done that affected my life in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's probably a big part of it, is just what's your exposure to a particular career.
Absolutely. And for our industrial employers that are listening, and we have a lot of them, I want you to hear that loud and clear. This is why it's so important to partner with education. This is why it's so important to serve on an advisory board inside of your technical or community college, why it's important to visit the high school, why it's important for these students to come visit your manufacturing plant. And this isn't like once a year, a manufacturing day. These are really, really tightly created relationships that can span generations of students, can span manufacturing technology, can span years and years. And this is how we create a rock solid relationship with our educators. So that's just a perfect example. I will also mention that I am familiar with FAME. I think the first time I saw a FAME program was in Kentucky, and just doing a great work of inspiring people toward careers in advanced manufacturing and giving them the skills that are necessary for them to be super successful when they get there, making right out of a 2-year program $85,000 a year. Very impressive. We talk about big companies, and we've mentioned some bigger companies' names today, both on the healthcare and on the manufacturing side. There's a lot of small to mid-sized companies in the manufacturing space that are, maybe they're a, 20, 30, $40 million company. Maybe they've got 50, 100, maybe 150 employees, sometimes even less than that. The advice to a large organization might look a little bit different than the advice to a small manufacturer. So, Casey, what advice would you have for a small to mid-sized manufacturer that's trying to build the same kind of relationship that you have with some of your supporters in all these endeavors we're talking about?
Well, it's one of the reasons I love Fame is because it helps create that collaborative where some of my smaller manufacturers, part of what Fame does is they hire students while they're still in my program and then give them mentorship and provide sort of that on the job training that's so critical for success once you graduate. It's a real cornerstone of the program. I think particularly small manufacturers that could only take one student every couple of years, that would be a hard thing to do without the collaborative, without all of the manufacturers together saying that this is important. And so being able to sort of tag on and say, this year I want one student is wonderful for some of our small employers, that they can have some of that same relationship that's facilitated by the EDA, and they don't have to be here for every activity. It would be impossible for them to get to every high school. We're talking about one person in charge at a plant who would be the person who would go recruit, and they just can't do it at the scale that we know that we need as an industry. And so having a manufacturers association or whatever that professional group is that helps you engage is a really good strategy for somebody who's in a smaller shop.
So a couple terms you just used that I want to make sure that our audience is familiar with. EDA, I'm assuming Economic Development Association, correct?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. And then tell us. I mean, I'm familiar with Fame because, as I mentioned, I got familiar with that program in Kentucky several years ago. But that might not be a household word to all of our listeners. Tell us a little bit about how Fame works.
So FAME is the Federation for Advanced Manufacturing Education. And the way that it works is that students come to BridgeValley 2 days a week and get their more traditional classroom and laboratory training. And they go to an employer 3 days a week where they're paid a wage, whatever the employer's wage is. This looks a lot like a pre-apprenticeship program in a lot of places. So they would go to a Nucor or a Toyota or a Cox Automotive, whoever they go to. And so they work there for 3 days a week, getting paid, getting mentorship, getting some of the things they need. I keep using Toyota as my example because they take so many of our students. But we had a student who went to Toyota and he couldn't afford basic personal protective equipment. And he hadn't said that. No one knew. And he showed up at Toyota and he had the wrong shoes on. And they said, you can't be here with those shoes on. And he showed up the next day and he had the wrong shoes on. And they're like, dude, what's the deal? You've got the wrong shoes on. Well, so he said to his mentor, I can't afford new shoes. And they were like, oh, well, we'll just take care of it. We didn't know. We'll take care of it. And so it's having those people in your life who are willing to come alongside you and say, oh, what is it that you need to be successful and how can we help you? And so it's seeing that our employer partners really want that for their employees and for my students. And those happen to be the same people when we're talking about FAME.
Absolutely. So really, I mean, it's this awesome combination of learning about advanced manufacturing, putting those skills to practice at the work site, and kind of doing both of those in concert with each other. And that opportunity, number one, they're earning some money along the way, right? But they're also gaining these skills, which are going to enable them to take on more responsibility in the workplace and eventually have that rewarded economically and so on. So it becomes this positive spiral in so many ways of creating this advanced manufacturing employee of the future, which is, of course, I'm a huge advocate for. I see how manufacturing is adapting and changing, and how technology and things like artificial intelligence and machine learning are becoming a bigger and bigger part of how we run our manufacturing companies. We need that next generation of talent in order to be able to grow as technology continues to change. But the truth of the matter is that our ability to generate that talent is only as good as our ability to get students enrolled in programs like this. I think you already touched on your example of it's going to be a lot better for an industrial employer to say, hey, here's a career and you can go to BridgeValley to earn the skills or gain the skills that are necessary to be successful there. And that's a much different message than maybe a college recruiter going out and saying, hey, if you come to us, there's going to be this job waiting on the other end. They're both important, but it's a different message. That really stuck with me. Are there other things that colleges should be doing to recruit this talent?
So we have a program here that's called Learn and Earn, and it's unique to community colleges in West Virginia, but it is certainly something that others could replicate. We provide a state funding stream that allows us to match wages with any employer. So whether you want one student or you want 50 students, I could match wages with you as long as you're willing to keep them in school. It could be for any of my technical programs. And so I have students in accounting who get picked up by car dealerships to be the accountant at a car dealership. And we'll split the wage with the car dealership. And so let's say you work 10 hours a week and you're getting paid whatever it is you're getting paid. At the end of the week, the car dealership or whoever the employer is will send us an invoice and say, here's what half the wages were, and we'll reimburse the business. And so it allows businesses to take on a student who's not fully trained yet. And so there is some risk, but it creates an incentive that we are really excited about here because training's wonderful, education is wonderful, and employers hire for experience. And so at the end of the day, if you have a student who comes out of my accounting program and you're an accounting firm, you're sort of okay. You're, maybe interested in talking to them. But as soon as you talk to a student who has that accounting degree and 2 years of experience doing accounting for anyone, you're way more likely to get hired in that permanent role. And so we've found some really good success making sure that we pair those work-based learning experiences with the education.
What's the funding source for that out of curiosity? I'm sure community colleges are hearing that and say, wow, that sounds awesome, but where does that other half of the funding come from?
In West Virginia, it's a state allocation, but it's instead of having it be an allocation to the colleges, it's sent to our central office in a central pool, and we all draw from it.
Well, it certainly sounds like that program is a win for the student. It's a win for the college because you have more students. It's a win for the community because you are creating the workforce. And it is a win for the employer who gets an opportunity to work with the student and also builds a relationship with a potential future employee. On the topic of win, I want to stay on this idea of how do we get young people and people of all ages excited about opportunities in our technical and community colleges. I know we'll agree that a huge part of that is building relationships with our high schools, with our K-12 districts, so that students can see these career pathways. The Win Academy is a really creative way that you're doing that, Casey. So tell our audience a little bit about the Win Academy.
So Win Academy is a small charter school. In some states, it would meet any criteria as a micro school. So it's a public school that does high school for students who are interested. We started it for nursing education. So students who are in high school who want to be a nurse come to the Win Academy, and they do college classes as dual enrollment. They're on campus at the college. They'll graduate from the Win Academy, not from a traditional high school. They'll graduate from high school with the Win Academy. And so we get them on track most of them have to do pre-nursing with us. They haven't done any of their pre-nursing prerequisites. So they do pre-nursing, which they would have had to do after high school. And then we have a few in their senior year who actually are fully in the nursing program, so 100% admitted into the nursing program. So we have a dozen students who will be 19-year-old fully licensed RNs. And so it's been amazing for the students who have chosen this. Their parents have said things from, I had a kid who was ready to drop out of school, and this is so much better for him. Just the social emotional piece of being in college instead of being in traditional high school has been good. I had another parent who told me that we're saving her family $70,000 compared to what she would have spent for a BSN program by sending her daughter while she's in high school. It's completely free for the families. And so it's been a creative way. This actually happened because I asked a local school district if they'd be willing to do a dual enrollment program with me where students would be immersed in those pre-nursing and then nursing courses, and they weren't ready. And so rather than say, gosh, let's wait years and years to give families this opportunity, we're like, well, there's a charter school provision. Let's just do it. And so it's been wonderful.
Sounds like it's been wonderful. And you think about the other part that I think gets lost sometimes when we think about any kind of dual enrollment program or any program where a student is earning college credit while they're still in high school is they get out into the workforce that much more quickly. So in a market like nursing where we don't have enough skilled people to fill all the jobs that are open, we get that person into the workforce that much sooner. And oh, by the way, for that individual, they're earning a salary that much sooner as well. So it's not just the money that's saved on tuition or saved on living expenses while they're going through their educational pathway, but the flip side of it is that they're done with that pathway sooner and out in the workforce earning money. So economically makes so much sense. And I'm a huge advocate, as our listeners know, for any kind of dual enrollment program or any type of transfer agreement that allows students to earn credit, college credit, while they're in high school. Because there, again, to the earlier point, everybody wins. It sounds like it's a little bit different than a traditional technical education program at a high school. Are there other differences that you would outline that we haven't covered yet?
Well, it's been so successful that this fall we're starting with another cohort in advanced manufacturing technology. And
Awesome.
so to your earlier point, I do think that one's been a harder high school group to recruit for because not everyone understands what that job might look like. But really it's different from a high school in that we don't have high school sports, we don't have the high school sort of experiences, we don't do prom. We have student clubs and activities. Our student government does do a dance once a year, but it is not the same as sort of a very traditional high school experience. And so we have had families who have said, gosh, my kid really likes being a cheerleader and wants to live out that high school dream of being a cheerleader, and then we'll talk about nursing school. And that's great. If that's what's right for their family, that's wonderful. But the families who have chosen this have been pretty intentional, have some pretty driven young people who are ready, who are just, they want to start a career. And we've had a few who have gotten into it. We have them all do a phlebotomy certification. While it's not required for nursing, we have all felt like that's pretty good immersion into nursing. And we had a couple go through phlebotomy certification and say, you know what, it turns out I hate blood. And so it's been a great opportunity to talk to a 16-year-old about, okay, great, how do you pivot? What else might you like in healthcare? And what does healthcare management look like? And maybe you'll like medical lab tech and you can look at cells and what are other things that we offer that you could start to explore. And it's a much richer career exploration than you get if you just take one health class because your high school makes you take one health class.
Absolutely. And it's all about providing options and on ramps and off ramps. I'm a huge believer in that whole concept and certainly lifelong learning as well, and all about inspiring students. I love the fact that you're looking at adding an advanced manufacturing technology pathway. In fact, I was going to ask that question before you raised it. If it's it's working so well for the right types of students on the nursing side, why not manufacturing? And it sounds like you're going down that path and would be excited to kind of watch how that rolls out and to see the success that I'm sure you're going to have in that arena as well. On this topic of inspiring students, and this is really what this does. I mean, whether it's a student that recognizes early on in a program, well, I wanted to be a nurse, but now I don't like blood. Okay, that's awesome. That's a good thing to learn. It's also about reaching as deep as we can and as early as we can into the education pathway to provide career awareness and it get young people excited about careers in whatever endeavor it is, especially as it relates to degree programs that are technical and community colleges. We've talked about the college itself. We've talked about high schools and K-12. We've talked about the WIN Academy. What about middle schools? Are there things that we need to be doing at that level as far as career awareness and inspiring young people?
There's a lot of work around career exploration that some of our middle schools do that is phenomenal. I saw a program in Colorado where they brought middle school students to the college and had students choose 3 things that they wanted to go visit during the day, and they got their first 2 choices, and then the third choice they assigned them to something that would be a non-traditional career path. So young men went to nursing programs, young women went to welding programs. They wanted to do a little exposure to something that students might not have picked for themselves. We've seen middle school programs all over the country that do really good rotations where they spend 3 or 5 weeks in a particular area and then they rotate to a different area. So it's enough time to build a birdhouse in construction, not a whole house. But you sort of get a little feel for what's the design and how do I read a blueprint and what might that look like so that you have a sense of what that career might look like. Because if you talk to most middle school students, they can't name more than 12 jobs. Quiz the young people in your life. They cannot name more than a dozen jobs. And the ones you're going to get are things like nurse, teacher, doctor, lawyer. They're things that they've had exposure with and that they've seen. But It's rare to hear someone say, oh, advanced manufacturing technology. They don't even know it's a job. And so any exposure we can do to help young people even understand what's possible helps them start to dream bigger about what their futures could look like.
Going back to something we mentioned earlier on in the discussion about the elevator speech, and I bet those 12 career pathways that the students might be familiar with, they're all the ones with the simple elevator speech that they've, to your point, already had exposure to. They've either gone to the doctor, they've been treated by a nurse, they're learning from a teacher, whatever that other career.
They all think they're going to be a social media influencer.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. And they all will be. It's just a question of how many they're influencing, right? So
Right.
um without question. So that's exactly right. I love that. I love that view. I haven't heard it characterized that way about they're familiar with 12 career pathways. I'm going to give you credit for that the first 3 times I use it, and I'm just going
Great.
to steal it and use it myself. That's
It's all
really
yours.
really, really good. So having such an awesome conversation with Dr. Casey Sachs today, the president of BridgeValley Community and Technical College. I do have one final question for you, Casey. We love this question, and especially given your fascinating career pathways. So before you're a college president, before you're at the Department of Education, before you're a psychiatrist, before you're a post-secondary student, you're a 15-year-old young girl with her whole life ahead of her, sophomore in high school, give or take. And if you had one opportunity to go back and give that young girl a piece of advice, what would that advice be?
Just keep saying yes to things. You never know what that's going to turn into, and they're amazing opportunities, and you can decide it's not for you, but try it out, and it'll turn into some really fun stuff.
That's what life is all about, right? Is that it's all these experiences, it's getting done, completing and getting into and finishing as many different things as we can. So that's why we're going through this journey called life. So make sure we're saying yes to things. I'm really glad, Casey, that you said yes to us when we reached out and said we'd love to have you on the Tech Ed podcast. So Dr. Casey Sachs, president of BridgeValley Community and Technical College, thank you so much for joining us on the Tech Ed podcast.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really a pleasure.
I learned so much on this episode of the Tech Ed podcast. I mean, this whole idea about having an elevator speech and the elevator speech for a nursing program being so much easier for a young person to understand and so much shorter than the elevator speech for, say, advanced manufacturing or an advanced manufacturing technology program. I love this whole idea about a middle school student only knowing about 12 careers. And if our careers that we're trying to recruit people toward aren't on that list of 12, no wonder we're having a hard time getting students excited about these career pathways. All the more reason to drive education and particularly technical education and CTE into our middle schools. This was just a terrific episode. We talked about FAME. We're going to link up some information about FAME in the show notes. We're also going to talk about the Inspiring Nurses program. We'll have some information on that in the show notes. We have the best show notes in the business, so visit techedpodcast.com/Sachs, SACKS. That's techedpodcast.com/SACKS for all of today's show notes. And while you're there and while you're doing it and while you're thinking about the Tech Ed podcast, reach out to us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. We are all over social media. So track us down, connect with us, reach out. We would love to be connected to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Tech Ed podcast. Until next week, I am your host, Matt Kirkner.